A long time ago, in the peaceful village of Akoma, love and prosperity filled the air. In this village lived a beautiful maiden named Lillian. From the time she was a little girl, she had served in the royal palace. But her life there was not by choice. Lillian's parents had once lived happily in Akoma, but their joy was short-lived. The king, a man of great power and cunning, saw their daughter's beauty and intelligence even as a child. Fearing that she was destined for something greater, he made a cruel decision. He banished her parents from the village. The people of Akoma believed he had shown mercy by taking Lillian into the palace, but in truth, he had taken her for his own plans. The king and queen had no daughter, only a son, Prince Afam. When Afam was born, a prophecy was spoken over him. The prince will never father a child, and the royal bloodline will end. The king was terrified. He sought the wisdom of magicians and seers, desperate for answers. Would his son be cursed? Would he never desire a woman? But no one could explain the prophecy, for the gods had not revealed their secrets. Determined to control fate, the king surrounded Afam with maidens, hoping to influence his desires. And among these maidens, he placed Lillian, the girl he had stolen from her parents. From childhood, she was ordered to serve the prince in every way, to be his shadow, his companion, his comfort. But little did the king know he was making a terrible mistake. Years passed, and Lillian and Prince Afam grew together. But their bond was not one of a master and servant, nor was it one of lovers. They were friends, true friends. While Afam was known to be a flirt, chasing after women in the palace and the village, he never treated Lillian like the others. But everything changed when Lillian became a woman. Her beauty and wisdom became known far beyond the palace walls. Men from distant villages heard whispers of her grace, and one by one, they came, bearing gifts, seeking her hand in marriage. Lillian saw this as a chance, a way to escape the golden prison the king had placed her in. She longed for freedom, for a life beyond the palace, for a life of her own. But Prince Afam did not like this. Though he had never claimed her as his own, the thought of Lillian leaving made him restless. He rejected every suitor with harsh words. He is too old. He is too poor. He comes from a bad family. One by one, the men were sent away, their gifts returned, their hopes crushed. Lillian's heart burned with frustration. She had spent her life in the palace, a servant to a family that had stolen her past. Now, they were stealing her future too. She refused to be a prisoner any longer. If the prince would not let her go, she would find another way. Even if it meant defying the king himself. The moon shone brightly over the palace courtyard as Lillian knelt before Prince Afam, her heart heavy with desperation. She had spent her entire life serving him, tending to his every need, and now, she only asked for one thing in return, her freedom. "My prince," she pleaded, her voice trembling, "I have given you my years, my youth, and my service. I have cared for your happiness. Please, give me mine. Let me go." Prince Afam's face darkened. He had never seen her like this, so desperate to leave him for another man. His jaw tightened as he tried to understand. "They are not rich, they are not handsome, nor are they kind," he muttered, but before he could finish, Lillian cut him off. "My prince, let that be my problem to worry," she said, falling to her knees once more. "I don't care about riches or looks. I only want a husband. A home. A life of my own." Afam stared at her, stunned. This was not the Lillian he knew. This was desperation at its peak. Could she not see? He loved her. But she was just a servant. She was nothing more than a girl raised in the palace walls. No man could treat her better than he could. If only she would stay. "Stay with me, Lillian," he said, his voice softer now. "Serve me as you always have. No man will treat you better. You have been a maid all your life. But I will give you a place, if not as my first wife, then my fourth or fifth wife. You will be safe." Lillian gasped and rose to her feet. Disbelief and heartbreak twisted inside her, making her stomach turn. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she swallowed them back. She had no words for him. No words for the prince who thought so little of her, who saw her only as a possession. She turned and left in silence, excusing herself to her corner. From the shadows, the king watched. And he smiled. His plan was working. His son had finally decided to marry the servant girl. The prophecy had no power here. The royal bloodline would not end. Months passed, and the kingdom was thrown into distress. The king had fallen seriously ill. His skin was pale, his strength fading by the day. Fear gripped the land. If the king died, who would rule? Prince Afam had yet to choose a bride. Instead of preparing for the throne, he spent his days seeking healers for his father's sickness and his nights chasing after young maidens in the village. The people whispered. Would the prince ever take his place as king? One morning, the chief priest arrived at the palace, his expression grave. He stood before the royal family and spoke. The cure to the king's illness lies in the forest of the 7th village, far from here. The queen gasped. The forest was dangerous. No one who ventured that far ever returned. The prince, however, scoffed. That is too far. I will find someone else to go. The chief priest's face darkened. No one else can make this journey, Prince Afam. If a sacrifice is demanded, you must be the one to give it. Silence filled the room. Then, from the shadows, Lillian stepped forward. I will go, she said, her voice steady. And if a sacrifice is required, I will give it. The chief priest looked at her with pity. His eyes saw what ordinary eyes could not. He saw the injustice, the suffering, the fate that had been forced upon this girl. Prince Afam, however, smiled. He was relieved that he would not have to leave the comfort of the palace. If you bring back the cure, he said kindly, I promise to make you my fourth wife. Lillian clenched her fists and shook her head. No, she said, turning to the chief priest. If I bring back the cure, Prince Afam must promise, before you and the gods, that he will let me go. I will no longer be a servant. Afam's expression darkened. What are you thinking? He snapped. Do not think too highly of yourself, Lillian. You are just a maid. There is no better man or life out there for you. But Lillian did not look at him. Instead, she turned to the chief priest. The priest sighed and looked at the queen. Will you send the prince on this journey? Or will you let the maiden go and grant her wish? But the queen, who had never cared for Lillian, spoke before anyone else could. She should go. It is too dangerous for the prince. He is the heir. He must be kept safe. The decision was made. Lillian smiled softly, bowed her head, and left to prepare for her journey. As she walked away, she did not look back. Her heart no longer belonged to the palace. It no longer belonged to the prince. It belonged to freedom. Lillian made her way through the dense forest of the 7th village, whispering prayers to the gods with every step. The air was thick with mystery, the trees whispering secrets of old. She clutched her cloak tightly, her heart pounding. She had only one goal, to find the cure and return in time to save the king. On the second day, just as the chief priest had described, she found the plant. It glowed faintly in the moonlight, its leaves rustling as if they held a great secret. She fell to her knees, hands trembling with gratitude. Thank you, gods of Akoma, she whispered. But just as she reached out to harvest the herb, an old woman appeared before her, seemingly out of nowhere. Her back was bent with age, but her eyes held a sharpness that cut through the night. That is not yours. Lillian's breath caught in her throat. She quickly bowed her head in respect. Thank you for coming, wise woman of Akom, she said, her voice steady. I am Lillian, a servant of the palace. I was sent to gather this herb to save the king's life, and to win my freedom." The old woman smiled, but there was sorrow in her eyes. "You wish to save the man who stole your life? The man who condemned you to misery?" Lillian's heart clenched. The king was afraid. The woman continued. "A prophecy told him that the royal bloodline would leave his family. He misunderstood, thinking his son would never have children. In his fear, he banished your parents and took you for himself. He knew that, one day, no man, not even his son, would be able to resist your beauty and wisdom. And he was right. But the prophecy was never about Prince Afam. It was about the king's own failures. He has ruled with fear, and his son has shown no worthiness to lead. That is why the gods have turned their favor elsewhere." Lillian swallowed hard. Her entire life had been built on lies and injustice. Yet, despite everything, she did not hesitate. "I am not looking back at the past," she said softly. "I do not wish to carry hate in my heart. If I can save the king and gain my freedom, that is enough for me." The old woman gazed at her for a long moment. Then, she looked up at the sky. "The gods accept your kindness. But the cure comes with a price." Lillian inhaled sharply. "Tell me what it is." The woman's voice was calm but firm. "Your womb." A cold chill ran through Lillian's body. "The gods demand that you give up the chance to bear children," the old woman said. "They are sparing you from the fate of the palace, but in return, your bloodline will end with you." Lillian's eyes filled with tears. Was this her fate? To suffer all her life, only to have her future stolen from her? She clenched her fists. "I have been kind. I have endured injustice. And yet, the gods ask for this." The woman remained silent. After a long moment, Lillian straightened her back, her voice unwavering. "If that is what the gods want of me, I will do it." The old woman's eyes softened. "Take the herb and go. Your sacrifice has already been made. Your kind heart is enough." Lillian let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She bowed deeply. "Thank you." She took the herb and rushed back to Akoma. The moment Lillian arrived at the palace, she presented the herb to the chief priest. He prepared it quickly, applying it to the king. Within moments, the king stirred. His weak body straightened, strength returning to his limbs as if by magic. Gasps filled the palace halls. The king had been brought back from the brink of death. The next morning, the chief priest returned with a message from the gods. He stood before the royal family, his voice echoing through the halls. "The prophecy has now come to pass." The queen and Prince Afam listened in shock. The servants hid behind pillars, eager to hear the words of the gods. Royalty is not just by blood. It is by duty. Prince Afam does not have the heart of a ruler. He has no compassion. And the king, in his selfishness, has tried to twist fate for his own gain. Because of this, the gods have chosen another. Prince Afam stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "Never. I am the heir. My father still lives, which makes me the king in waiting." The chief priest's eyes did not waver. "There will be no king in waiting. The gods have not chosen a king. They have chosen a queen." A stunned silence fell over the room. Prince Afam's face turned pale. "No. A maiden of Akoma can never take my birthright." He turned to his father, desperate for support. The chief priest continued, his voice unwavering. "The injustice of your father forcing a young girl into servitude has led to this moment. And your own reckless actions, chasing after maidens and dishonouring them, have sealed your fate. The gods have decided. The royal bloodline has ended." The king sat frozen on his throne, his face unreadable. The queen's voice was sharp. "Who is this maiden?" The chief priest smiled. "Lillian." A collective gasp filled the palace. The gods have found favor in her, the priest continued. She has given what no man or woman would offer. She will carry the crown all her life. Prince Afam turned to the chief priest, then to his father, his lips parted in disbelief. But I love Lillian, he protested. That still makes me the rightful king. I will marry her. But before anyone could respond, Lillian ran forward. She fell to her knees before the chief priest, her body shaking with sobs. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, gods of Akoma, for finding favor in me. Afam stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. He bent down, speaking softly. Lillian, my servant. My love. You do not have to leave me. I will marry you. We will rule together. You will be my first wife. But Lillian stopped crying. Slowly, she lifted her head. And she laughed. It was not the laugh of a servant. Not the laugh of a girl who had spent her life begging for scraps of happiness. It was the laugh of a queen. The queen of Akoma. The queen who had no king. The queen who had freed herself. If you want to hear more about Queen Lillian's reign, the fate of Prince Afam, and the future of Akoma, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications for part 2. Thank you for watching. See you on our next video.